Andrew Bogut, thank you for coming on Based Podcast, Based with Senator Alex Antic. Can't think of anyone who's more based than you, I got to say. Certainly not in sport terms. Sort of fits the podcast description pretty well. So I've been saying for a long period of time, actually, one of the things we need in politics are people with a bit more spine, but that applies to sport as well and applies to all parts of life, I think, entertainment, movies, TV, you name it. What's your, your sort of snapshot background? Your mum and dad were born great part of the world in Croatia. My dad was born in Belgrade in Serbia, so we should probably be arguing at the moment, but we're probably going to
We should have a
probably going to
referendum.
knock it and do. Yeah, that's it. But I think I came here in the 70s, and you obviously you grew up an Aussie kid playing a bit of footy. What happened? How come the AFL lost you to basketball?
I'm not sure, actually. I grew up playing a little bit of AFL, but I just fell in love with basketball. I mean, basketball in the 90s in Australia was kind of picking up. It was on Channel 10, I remember it. And yeah, just always had a fascination with throwing a ball through a hoop. And I liked footy, but you kind of have to, growing up in Melbourne, you kind of have to have a team and play a little bit of footy at school. But it never was, I was 80% interested in footy, but 120% interested in basketball. So it all kind of went that way. A lot of people think I played basketball just because I was tall, but it wasn't the case. I genuinely love the game from a young fella.
What is you stopped playing footy you sort of continue to play footy while you're playing basketball as a kid, and you just sort of, there would have been some AFL scouts, I reckon, looking around for a signature at some point at 7 foot. I mean, that would have been a pretty handy.
Yeah, I was a 7 foot at 10 though. Look, I mean, I gave it up pretty early. I did a lot of the clinics back when they were called a Vic Kick, which is now Oz Kick. So that shows my age, but I did a lot of stuff with that. I never played competitively for club. I played at school a little bit. And yeah, once I started basketball competitively, there was no time for other sports. I think I got to a point where I did gymnastics first because my sister had to go to gymnastics. I hated it. And then I had to go and jump onto, what did I do after that? Taekwondo, didn't really like that. And then basketball was kind of like, my parents were like, if you choose this is it. We're not changing sports anymore.
I'm sick of turning up on Saturday mornings and change it. But so who was it? Like sporting heroes? Tony Kukoc, the great Tony Kukoc from the Bulls and others. Of course, I just finished watching The Last Dance for the second time, so I'm all across it. But was he kind of one of your idols?
Yeah, I think, look, as kids, we identify with people that look like us. And Tony was a really scrawny, skinny guy, as I was as a kid. I couldn't put on weight for the life of me. And like, that's my guy. Looks like me. He's Croatian. I'm Croatian background, so it all kind of fit in. And a guy I kind of looked up to just with the way he was able to handle the ball and pass as a big guy was something that I identified with well.
It was a big deal in European basketball before he went to the Bulls too, wasn't he? He was sort of floating around, causing a lot of commotion, and then hit the big time in the NBA. So I can imagine that'd be the case. What about AFL? Do you have any AFL heroes?
Yeah, I liked Gavin Wanganeen. I'm an Essendon Bombers fan, so I grew up watching the premierships early on in my childhood, and a big fan of Gavin Wanganeen. We also like Michael Long. A lot of the players that had a lot of flair, I used to identify with as a young fella. I used to just love guys that would just back themselves and try to break through a pack and carry it themselves to the forward line and kick as the forward. So they were probably two guys I really liked.
That'd be Derek Kickett as well from that era, who was a superstar as well. Essendon guy originally went to Sydney. But I mean, you say the Bombers, pretty topical at the moment with the Bombers thinking about changing their name. Wokeness in sport, what's happened?
I mean, how long do we have, Alex? It's I started to really notice it before COVID, and then it really confirmed a lot of my thoughts. I think the government's so entrenched in sports that they kind of have to take the knee. You look at the AFL, that in my opinion, the AFL, at least in Victoria, is another arm of the government. And people will look at me like I'm crazy, like I'm a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but a lot of the messaging that comes down to the AFL comes from the government. And you just start to notice it more. COVID, they're wearing masks on the footy field, but yet they're traveling unencumbered around Australia. And I speak to AFL boys, and they were like, we don't feel too comfortable. Like, our families are locked up and locked down, and we're kind of traveling through Australia like normal. It's kind of, we feel bad about it, but unfortunately, a lot of people in those positions just don't have, they don't have a say, and they can't have a say. And I know their clubs had meetings, and the AFL had meetings during COVID saying, under no circumstances are you allowed to say anything that's contra the government and their restrictions and the lockdowns. And even if your family's struggling, we don't want you to say anything publicly because you guys are lucky. The government's letting you play. The government's letting you fly. So kind of shut the F up and get on with life, even though some guys had family members that were suicidal, that ended up in hospital and whatnot and all that kind of stuff. So that's when I really started to realize that sport washing is a thing, and I think
Yeah.
Australia is probably one of the best at sport washing through politics.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good term. I haven't heard that. We've heard greenwashing and others, but sport washing is a really good term. I'm going to start using that now. I'm going to pinch it from you, and I'll credit you for it at all
I
turns.
stole
But
it off someone, so you can steal it off me.
yeah, it's always the way. It's everything always is stolen from someone else. But it's really noticeable. I mean, I've been following it for years, and following the AFL in particular, watching it kind of drop off over the years, and it's just become more and more noticeable. And of course, it's a closed shop. You can't go to Europe and play AFL. You can't go to the US and play AFL. You're here. You do what you're told. And I think COVID really did nail that, didn't it? Like you could sort of see it come through, but it's been creeping in. Is it the same in the US? Like, I mean, my impression of the NBA is that, yeah, okay, there have been instances, but from the outside, it doesn't feel quite as affected with wokeness. So is that just me?
To an extent, it is a little bit. You have to remember the US is a massive area, and state to state is different politics and different agendas. And then you've got the feds. Obviously, you don't have too much of a push, but the NBA has it to an extent. But I think Australia's up there in the world. I think they're probably
Yeah.
one of the one or two in sport washing. Honestly, I truly believe that. And living back here and noticing what's going on, and there's a lot of sports that are begging for funding. The NBL, which I'm involved with, is one of them. Netball Australia, all these kind of smaller leagues that are coming up, they need the funding. So it's like, are you going to take the knee for funding, or do you want your sport to go under? And then they have to promote whatever the in thing is with government. At one time it was COVID. They have to promote all that. They have to push all that. Even if you don't believe it, it's like the big wigs in your sporting organization, even your club, are going to come tap you on the shoulder and say, that tweet you put out, like the government doesn't like that, and they're paying for our facility, or they're letting you fly during COVID. So just keep your mouth shut. And you talk about sport, but you see that in all walks of life. I also came to realize, at least in Victoria, the amount of businesses and companies that are dependent on the government in one way or another, whether it be government contracts, whether it be grants, whether it be COVID payments, whether it be exemptions for more workers to come in, blah, blah, the list goes on. The government's got their arm in everything, at least in Victoria. I think in Australia, to an extent, I just think Victoria is even further on steroids. And you start to notice that there's a lot of people that just had to shut up. And there were people, I had friends that were like strongly against what was going on, but they're like, it's going to cost me a government contract if I say something. And that's a tough one. I can't be a hypocrite. I was towards the tail end of my career once all this COVID stuff happened, and then I was retired, so I could freely speak out even more. I was always outspoken during my career, but if I was in the midst of my career, at the start of my career, I can't be a hypocrite and say I'd be as vocal as I was today, because I'd have a massive decision to make. Food for my family and a wage and all that kind of stuff, and living out my dream, or potentially getting that tap on the shoulder from the club or a league saying you need to shut up or you're out.
It's interesting that dynamic is playing out across society, I think, in Australia now, where you're seeing big business mirroring the government, and government mirroring big business, corporates and that sort of thing. And the power is getting sort of centralised in a few hands at the top of the tree, while everyone else is sort of getting stepped on. And we saw that through COVID. All the big end of town, the billionaires made more, and the little shop down the road got stepped on. That is seemingly where it's going. I mean, we'll get our tinfoil hats on now, but that really is the essence of what is a great reset, isn't it? It's kind of this almost, I've been calling it Communism 2.0, this kind of new version of doing things and getting this one singular message through one singular source of, of truth, if you like. And we're seeing that project out through sport. We're seeing it project out through the corporate sector with their ESG agenda. And it's interesting. It's interesting to hear you say that in Australia, because most of us have been, here in Australia for the better part of 3 or 4 years and haven't left, haven't gone anywhere. It's hard to know, but in America, people were shocked, I think, at what they saw during COVID. Are you getting that kind of feedback from people, friends of yours that live in the US? Were they kind of shocked about, or are they shocked about where Australia is going?
During COVID, I was getting all kinds of text messages. Are you okay? What's going on? We see, 1 minute snippet of 5 minutes, 5 kilometers from home. It was Victoria at the time. All that kind of stuff. 1 hour of exercise. They're seeing all these stuff, and then they're messaging me. And this is, I've got friends that are high net worth individuals that are moderate. I have friends that are everyday workers. They were all like, "What the hell's going on?" We thought Australia was the we Crocodile Dundee, right? Like that's what we
Yeah.
watch. It's a free society. It's happy go lucky. Like what's going on there with your government? And I was like, yeah, that's where we're at. Like if this was done, in any other time outside of a pandemic, there'd be a humanitarian crisis essentially. If you're locking people in your home, and I think it was so easy. The fact that it was so easy to do is another concern.
Mm.
The fact that a lot of Australian people just laid down and took everything as gospel from the government. You have to be able to question your government. You have to be able to ask questions. You have to be able to disagree with your government. You have to be able to sometimes, good people break bad rules, right? Like there's, like you're standing in the middle of a desert and there's a crossing with a red light, right? And you push the button and there's not a car inside. Are you going to wait, a minute or two when there's not a car anywhere? You're going to cross the road.
Mm.
But in Australia, we're so conditioned. You stand over there, you push that button, or you can't park there, or you can't do that. And that really, went crazy during COVID. And it was to the click of your fingers. You got neighbors telling on neighbors. I had a mate that went for his exercise. He has a big dog, right? Like a massive, I think a Malamute, has a newborn baby. So he's like, I can't walk them both at the same time because this dog's like pulling me like I'm on the back of a speedboat. So he took his baby for a walk in the stroller and came back and then left it with the wife and then took the dog. And the neighbor came out and goes, "You've had your 1 hour exercise today." Like that's how bad it was. And you can't really explain it to people in the US. They're still shocked to this day when I talk to them about, yeah, you guys went a little overboard with all that.
Yeah, it's sort of you cast your mind back to what it was like a year or so ago, and you actually do have to pinch yourself sometimes. And I spoke a bit to some US journos about it as well, mainly because of my contempt for the local media here, I have to say, because I thought the best way to get message out to Aussies was to go right around the other side of the world into the US media and talk to them that way, and it seemed to work. We just don't seem to have enough journalists in this country anymore that are prepared to do anything other than transcribe media releases, frankly. And we know what happened during COVID over that period, but I mean, do you think from what you saw, through that period, that there's something unique to the Aussie psyche? I mean, I had this discussion with a few American commentators about the fact that the US was born of war and trying to fight for their freedom through, through the independence movement in the 1700s. And we didn't have that. We were sort of largely, I mean, obviously people like you and I have roots back to a different part of the world, but for the better part, this country was founded on a penal colony, and in the case of SA, sort of free settlers. Like you've got a unique experience having seen both countries so carefully. You spent more than a decade in the US. Like, what is it about the Aussie culture, do you reckon, that let us do that?
I think it's just been too easy too long here. I think, the point you made at the start, the US have had to have numerous wars and that. Now, I'm not condoning war, but they've had to fight for what they have. We haven't. We've just been basically given this great life in a beautiful country, and people are conditioned to the government knows best. The government's always got my best interest in mind. The government's
Mm.
always right, and that's a dangerous slope. And I think the government knows that. Like the politicians know, they know. Like people are going to listen to us no matter what we do. Like we can raise taxes tomorrow and say it's for something that's going to help them and spin it in a certain way. Like Victoria did. We're not gonna raise any more taxes when Andrews gets re-elected, right? But now there's a COVID levy on land tax. Not a tax though. It's a COVID levy. So it's rebranded, and people just buy it. They just buy it, and you're just like, man, like how can you buy this stuff? And my father always used to say, Australia's coming from where he came from. He said Australia's a beautiful country that's had it very, very easy for so long, and one day reality is going to hit. And I think for the most part, the Australian psyche is if you've got, why sport went on, in my opinion, during COVID was because I think that was the one thing that would have turned a lot of people against the government in Australia. But the fact that a lot of Australians, as long as you had your fridge full of beer and your rugby league, your AFL was on sport on the weekend, you were okay. Life's not too bad. And I think the government knew that. They said, we're going to make sure sport goes on throughout all this because there might be a little bit of a riot if it doesn't. And kept sport going. I think that, it's just interesting coming from a communist nation, a background of a communist nation, Yugoslavia, my parents, the stories that I heard, the things that went on there. It was, people hate to hear this and say it's crazy to compare. It was very similar to what was happening in COVID. Very, very similar. And my grandmother, God bless her soul, she's passed away during that time. She was getting PTSD because she's like, I saw all this growing up. Like I saw neighbors telling on neighbors, and you got to visit that person through a piece of glass at a nursing home. And can't hug and you can't do this in 1 hour visits. Like she's like, I lived this in my childhood, and speaking to her about it was very, very interesting perspective because she lived in both realms at their peaks.
Yeah, that's the most thing. One of the things that really stuck out for me. I mean, I went to the freedom rallies here in SA. There weren't a lot of us from politics that did, but this is the one issue that really lit the flame in me, and I think part of it is because of that, lineage as well. Probably, and I was going to ask you that question actually, but the number of times that over the course of the last 2, 3, 4 years, or however long it's been now, generally as this has built up, from people from Eastern Europe, former communist nations that have said, we've seen this before, we've seen it. Like, this is why we left. We came here, Poles, Hungarians, Croats, Serbs, Slovenians, you name it. They all said it to me during that period. And it's amazing how many times I've heard that repeated. It is the same story you just made then, is just incredible. People have to learn the lessons of that part of the world. They've now sort of almost come out the other end of the pipe and are doing the opposite. If you look at the Viktor Orban government in Hungary, almost pushing back in the other direction. And we seemingly now are getting our turn with Communism 2.0, as I call it. So it's interesting. My grandma would have been the same. She died sort of 5, 6 years ago, but the reason I'm here is because they fled from the communists. And I don't know if that's your story as well, but certainly she would have been appalled by what she saw. I reckon it's just a flashback. She would have had, as you say, PTSD. But just in terms of that, how do you ever get back to Croatia? Do you ever sort of take any trips over there and see the family? And have you done it since COVID?
I haven't done it since COVID.
Mm.
I had an apartment there on the island of Pag, which is off the coast of Zadar, for about 10
Mm.
years. So every NBA off season, problem was when I came to Australia in the off season, it was winter, so I didn't really have a summer. So I bought a place over there, and I would 1 year I spent 2.5 months there. So talking about living on two continents, I felt like I lived on three at times, and I would go every
Yeah.
off season to Australia for about a month or two, and then I go to Croatia for a month or two, and spent a lot of time there on the Dalmatian coast. Whole different mentality to
No.
Australia and America. It's all about wine, cheese, cured meats, sitting back, taking it easy, not doing too much. I mean, they'll complain about not having money, but then the next minute they'll just be sitting at a beach in a beach chair. So I kind of like the slowness of it over there, and it's a bit of a different mentality. I've done the whole family tour a few times through the villages. My dad's from Osijek, which is kind of far inland, and my mum's from Karlovac. So we've done all those as well, and they get pretty tough because you put on about 10 kilos in 3 days visiting everyone, because they all cook you a massive feast, and you just ate at the last place you visited, so you got to be careful. But yeah, I've enjoyed my time going over there. I've got family over there, but I haven't been back since COVID, just because I didn't want to leave Australia and then get locked out, because our government was so gung ho on going Gestapo-ish that they locked our borders, and even when it was open, I was like, do I go? And then 3 weeks later, they say to snap, close the borders again, and I'm stuck somewhere abroad. Like, I just didn't want to risk it with 2 young kids. So we stayed put during Australia. And to be honest, it was hard enough getting state to state for the most part than to even consider getting out of the country.
So talking about COVID, what was your COVID, time like? Just take us through that. I mean, everyone's version of it was different, but when did you start to think, hang on, what's this all about? Obviously, did through following your Twitter feed, and as I said, fairly base stuff. You've certainly got your eye on the ball when it comes to the issues, I have to say. So, but what was it? What was it about COVID in particular, and how did it play out for you?
It was an interesting one for me, Alex, because I was supposed to play in the 20 Olympics. My goal was to play in the 20 Olympics and then retire. And then that got postponed, and my back was kind of messed up. I knew I'd have to play another pro year to get to 21 Olympics that they moved it to, and I just couldn't do it, so I retired.
Mm.
So I went from on a plane in an arena every day for the last 15 years to coming back to Australia and being kind of, quote unquote, locked in your house. And I struggled with it like everyone. But I looked at it like I'm still doing okay. I've got a pool outside. House is nice, all that kind of stuff. And I guess for the first month or two, I kind of didn't disagree with the lockdowns. I'd say about a month or two, I was like, you know what? Never been in a pandemic in my life. Trust what's going on all over the world. The news is feeding us all this stuff. Yeah, it makes sense. Let's lock it down and quell the virus, and then we can move on with life. And after about a month or two, I was like, this just keeps getting postpone, like, all right, let's go 3 months now, let's go 4 months now. And obviously it wasn't working. Back then I was like, well, if you're going to lock our citizens down, why not close the Australian borders then? Why not close them early? And because what was happening, we had lockdowns then for the locals, and then a case would come in from overseas, and you're like, all right, logically, as harsh as it is, just close the borders for a month, and let's see how it goes. But anyway, at that time, I guess when I started trending with all this, it was probably mid 20. I got a message from a mediating firm that brings me deals, marketing deals, and all this kind of stuff, and came through to my PA at the time, and it was can you do a PSA about stay safe, stay in your house, stay locked down, blah 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 blah. And I got the script, and I looked around my house, and I'm like, don't need to work, don't need a salary, don't need to go to work, can stay locked down in my house. Nice pool, kids are fine, wife's fine, no pressures, no bills no bills that are overdue, no mortgages I have to pay. Like, this is super hypocritical for me to do this thing, even though I was going to get paid for it, right? And I'm like, not going to do it. Like, it doesn't sit right with me. I'm preaching to people that are really struggling, that can't go to work, that can't feed their family, that might live in a 2-bedroom unit now and have 2 young kids, and everyone's on top of each other. And that can be within itself. A man that goes to work for 12 hours a day, all of a sudden, or a woman that goes to work, has their freedom, their routine. Now you're just at home stuck 24 hours straight, 2 young kids, all this. They don't go to school. So that was hard for a lot of people, right? And I refused to do it. And then I did a video about it, and it kind of blew up. And people were like, see, I know the government's paying people. And I don't know, I can't confirm whether it was from the government, but I'm pretty sure there was a pool of money that went out to influencers through a mediator, sorry. And that was how it came on my desk. And I just really struggled with it. And then after 6 months, and then 12 months, and then snap lockdown, then we're open, then we're closed. I'm just like, this doesn't make sense anymore to me. Especially once you start banning exercising and gyms and all that kind of stuff. And there was never any talks about getting out in the sun and getting vitamin D and eating right. And I know I'm rambling on here, but like, when I was stuck in Melbourne for that long lockdown in I think it was 21. And one thing I noticed, whenever there was a lockdown, say I would just go to the supermarket to get food or whatever, whenever there was a lockdown called, the nights preceding that, the fast food restaurants, the car park was full, absolutely full to the brim. I'm talking the drive-throughs at like my local KFC, which would never be more than 4 or 5 cars deep, to the highway. And I'm like, okay, so we're in a health pandemic, health crisis, and everyone's going to eat. You can eat that every now and then, but that's what people are going to do, because obviously they can't afford to cook. They're probably scared to go to the grocery store. So let's just get something quick and easy. Government wasn't talking about any of that. And that's when I was like, no, this is something's not right here. And I just kind of clicked off and started putting my own views out there, and some hated it, some loved it.
And obviously you'd be the kind of person people would recognise on the street a lot. What's been the pushback? I mean, have you you would have got that before COVID, obviously. People would have recognised you and come up and said, g'day. Are you finding now people are really grateful for having another voice out there saying, hang on, what's this all about? I mean, do you get a bit of that?
Alex, the amount of people in public that come up to me and say thank you is unbelievable. But if you go on social media, it's opposite. So if you go on social media, it's generally, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're an idiot, shut up, blah, 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 blah. But it's one person with 1,000 accounts. I know for a fact it is, because I weight that when I go in public. I've had one person kind of get into it with me. One in the last 3 years, right? And he was on the drink at a basketball game. So being a bit of rebellion, right? But when I'm out, that's how I temper it. Like, come talk to me. Like, or people say, oh, they're intimidated by you because you're big in this. I'm happy to talk to anyone, and I'm happy to hear opposing views, and I love to have a debate about things. Like, if you come up to me and say, what you said was wrong, let's talk about it. Let's have a chat about it. But if you come up to me like, aggressively and swearing and being an idiot, then I'm going to go back at you the same way. And people are like, oh, you should take the high road. But I definitely gauge it. When I'm out in the community, it's unbelievable. And I appreciate all those people saying thank you. I mean, I'm often out with my wife and kids, and my wife gets a wry smile when people come up and say, thank you for doing that. I was in a dark time, and it was so nice to hear someone that actually has a mainstream voice actually going against some of the stuff that was being fed to us, because we couldn't hear it anywhere else. And that's why these forums are important, these podcast forums, and sure, we'll get into it a little bit later, but these forums are very, very important, because our media here is bought and owned by the government, whether it's through direct funding, whether it's through grants, whether it's through advertising, right? There's some sort of arm that's going to these media companies that from the government too. You talk about that stuff, like that's scary stuff, like really scary stuff, because the government's starting to see, oh, we can't really control social media and podcasts. Let's put in the e-safety act, and that to me is another alarming thing we're doing in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question because I've gauged it too. There is an enormous voice out there that's just doing something quite different to what the mainstream narrative's doing, and I hear it as well. When I go out in the street and in public, people are telling me a very, very different thing than we're hearing on social media, than we're hearing in the mainstream media. If you open up, or if you're foolish enough to open up the newspaper here in SA in the day, you just seem to get ad after ad after ad for it's real estate, or it's whatever you know salacious issue of the day number one is, but mainly it's
Get your
just the
six
narrative.
booster. That's still trending,
Yeah,
isn't it? We've still got TV ads
yeah,
for get your
yeah,
six booster.
yeah, all of that, that's right. So, and yet outside that sphere, it gives me a whole lot of comfort to know that people aren't buying it, and so it's just really interesting to hear about it from someone else's point of view, someone who's really high profile, hearing it on the street, like gives you hope. What we've got to do, I think, is raise that voice, find ways to get people to in their own spheres. I mean, I've been saying it for a long period of time, and I'm doing what I can. Everyone's got their role, right? So I happen to find myself in the privileged position of having this job for however long. But throughout COVID. So what do I do to try and do the right thing, to try and push back and help where I can? Well, I think my role is speaking about the issues, but also trying to fix politics a bit as well, trying to get real people back into politics. One of the problems politics has had generally, I think, is it's become a swamp. We have people who are just involved in politics. That's all they do. It's all they've ever done. They start and work for politicians, then they go and become the politician, then they go and become a lobbyist, and you get this sort of sway. But it just goes to show how important it is for people in other spheres as well, and why it's so important that people like you have spoken out about it as well, spoken your mind. I mean, people will say, well, I agree with that, I don't agree with that, but at least that bloke's telling me what
That's
he
good.
thinks.
No,
It's great.
you have to have
Yeah.
disagreements and discussions. I was longing for during the COVID period. I was longing for someone to get, give me someone that's pro lockdown and give me someone that's anti lockdown, and let's have a discussion for an hour on TV.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it. It's all 3 minute.
No.
You do this, citizen. You do this. You need to do this. The government said do this. Let's have a discussion about it. Let's have a discussion about, hey, make sure when you get out for exercise, you get in the sun a little bit. Hey, make sure when you lock down, get some exercise in at home. All that kind of stuff. There was no discussions on it at all. It was like it was dictatorship like, and it really bothered me. And these forums are hugely important for that. And we don't really have many of these in Australia. I mean, the US is much bigger. So, Joe Rogan podcast, those kind of podcasts can do it. We need to do that in Australia. And I'm working on something to try and get to that eventually, because I just don't think there's any of these conversations. And on the flip side, you can't even get discerning points of view these days to actually have a civil conversation. You want to have the craziest ideas in the world made public, in my opinion. This whole cancelling, shadow banning, all that kind of stuff. E-safety officer, you can't say this. I want the crazy guy to say something crazy so I know he's crazy. And then I want to debate it with him, because all that's going to happen is if you don't allow them a voice, no matter how crazy and extreme, what's going to happen? They're going to go find other like-minded people that hold their crazy views. Let's say it's really radical, crazy views. You're going to find, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 50 of them, join their little group. It becomes an incel group. And then stupid shit happens beyond that. Like, who knows what can happen with terrorism, all that kind of stuff. You want these views public, so the public says, hey, hang on a second, mate. Like that thing you said, that's just crazy. You can't do that. No, that's wrong. And these are the reasons. And then it kind of handles itself in society. But the fact that you're going to cancel and silence those people, obviously barring, blatant abuse or any of that stuff is a no-go zone totally. But if it's someone that just has some weird theory about something, you want to debate it. You want them to have that public voice.
Yeah, it's this slippery slope, isn't it, in a sense, because they always say freedom of speech is not finite. You can't have absolute freedom of speech. You can't have people walking around saying, I want to get that guy, I want to kill that person, I want to do this, I hate that group, and I'm whatever. But that's sort of the excuse which is used for shutting down genuine debate now, I think you find. And it's we saw that with the work we did with the Freedom of Information application, which showed that, we did this in December of last year, which showed that the Department of Home Affairs were actually actively referring social media posts from Australian citizens back to the social media companies in order to get them pulled down. Of course, using that exact same argument we just talked about, that they had that power originally, quite rightly, to shut down things like terrorist attacks or whatever, like they had in Christchurch, that horrendous stuff. But then once that power is given, it then gets used to shut down people who abuse, who have a go at mask mandates or something, and actually turn out to be 100% right down the track. So this is the problem, isn't it, with censorship? And we're now seeing it with these new proposed laws the government have got here, Labor government have got here in Australia federally, that's been put out for an exposure draft, which people may or may not be aware of, but to give more powers back to the government to put a code of behaviour on social media companies and social media publishers generally. So that would apply to this podcast, to your podcast, such that they abide by whatever misinformation or disinformation is, and that's set by the government. So that's a ministry of truth. Like that's horrendous. And it's specifically designed to allow there's a specific definition under the Draft Act, but basically major publications and the government to be immune from it. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's basically legitimately targeting this stuff.
Like, so the government can come out and say something that's just, wrong, like, i.e., it's going to stop the spread, and it doesn't. Are they finding themselves? Like, it's absolutely bonkers.
Absolutely staggering, and it's creeping in. Of course, this is a targeted play at exactly what you're saying, that these sort of platforms are, like all of people that are talking about things privately, and there's a heap of them. I mean, a lot of people are doing a lot of good stuff out there, but they would become targets of this ACMA, Australian Communications Media Authority code of practice, which is set by the government. So this is happening all over the West. It's happening in the UK. It's happening in the Netherlands. It's happening in New Zealand. These similar sorts of plays. Like from your perspective, what do you put that down to? I mean, you've seen this from the US side of it, but is there something? Is this just simply a trend? Is it a cultural phenomenon, or is it a bigger play from big government and big corporates?
Yeah, I mean, the end game, I have no idea. I mean, there's a lot of theories and rabbit holes you can jump down for the end game. There's a lot of people that have an opinion on that, but I'm playing what's going on now, and it's scary. It almost seems like, you look at what the WHO is trying to do with their, I guess, their policies, and when they put out health alerts, they want the whole world have to follow them, kind of like a big world government, like a one world government. That's scary in itself, because that means that our local politicians and whatnot have to be dictated to by a body that's not even based in Australia. I mean, just that alone is crazy. All these rules they're putting in, the safety commissioner and all that. What people need to realize is you might be in favor of those right now because it's pushed by your political party, but one day your political party is not going to be in power, and it's going to be used against you. And that's what people don't realize. And that was a huge issue throughout communism and throughout all these socialist agendas historically. When you read up on them, is there were a lot of these, rules put in that were pushed, that were co-signed by the people. Yeah, this is a great rule. It's keeping us safe. And then, you fast forward down the line, it was actually used against their own citizens. And we're seeing that with, is it SA with the freedom of protest? Was it SA that put one in?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, they've changed the rules there.
Yep.
So that's going to, okay, right now, let's say you vote left or you vote right. So you're Labor and you're like, yeah, Labor put this in. This is great. The Libs might be in one day and they've still got that law they can use, and they're going to use it against you. Like that's what people don't understand. You want to have that freedom. You want to do it, but it is scary times. And I guess my concerns are more for my children and grandchildren. Like what's Australia and the world going to look like in another 20, 30 years? It's a pretty scary question to ask. And on the flip side of that, we do know historically the pendulum swings violently on these things. And I don't think that's a good thing either. I don't think you want the pendulum to go from where it is now, which is extreme, some of this extreme things that are going on in the communities, with kids' schools, with all that kind of stuff. Some of the agendas being pushed with all that. That's wild on this side. But you also don't want it to swing back to where we're, labeling everyone, discriminating against everyone as well. But I think the wings on both sides, in my opinion, are the same. So when you look at the far left and the far right, in my opinion, I think they're touching today. I think their ideals are exactly the same. It's like, oh, you disagree with us? You
It's
can't
the
put that up.
horseshoe, isn't it? They meet in the middle.
Yeah, it literally is. But you can't tell people on the far left, which is cheek right now, that the left is in power basically worldwide, which is fine. And just for the record, that there's some things on the left that I agree with. Like there's some things that on the not the far left, on the left, and there's things on the right. And I think every person should have that. As soon as you go, I'm Team Labor, so I believe everything Labor says, or I'm Team Liberal, I'm everything they say. And no, you should be able to criticize your own party too. You got to look at yourself in the mirror. So I just find it funny that you know those wings on both sides, they have the same ideals and they have the same tax on discrimination and people and how they handle things, and that's really disappointing.
I mean, it's because I made the same point about social media, because really social media at the moment is mostly, I would say, maybe other than Twitter now, leaning away from the conservative side of politics and the sort of the centre right even. It's lent towards the left. But, I made this observation a couple of times in Parliament, like that swings, exactly that argument, that swings. So everyone that's championing this, well, misinformation, we've got to shut down the conservative voices and all that sort of stuff, you only have to look at what happened in Twitter and you can see how things can flip very quickly if the mechanism's there or the machine's there to censor people. So it's a massive issue. I just don't think anyone across the West has come to terms with this yet. I've been pushing for inquiries into social media and the influence on an Australian democracy. If you think about having foreign companies dictating terms to the Australian discourse and the debate, it's a frightening proposition. Have you experienced? I mean, the answer will be yes. I'm no doubt about it. But how much, perhaps, should I say, shadow banning and censorship have you faced on social media? Have you had posts taken down?
Yes, Instagram is the one that went after me numerous times. I posted a screenshot from the Victorian government website about gender affirmation, about how something along the lines of that teachers don't have to tell their parents about a kid potentially transitioning, and they can keep separate pronouns for them at school and not let their parents know. I posted a screenshot of it from the government website, and I got flagged as false information. So I was like, "What the hell's going on? How is it? This is from the government website." So
Mm.
um, I went on a rabbit hole to find out who RMIT Fact Labs were. I found every
Mhm.
one of them. This is this person. They're going to tell, they're saying this is false information, blah, 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 blah. So I went after every one of them individually. And then I got a tip that you can actually email them and get a reason why it was pulled. So I found the email, and I emailed them and said, "Can you please give me some context on why this was pulled? Here's the link from the government website. Here's a screenshot." Wrote back and said, "Oh yeah, sorry, this was an accident. The algorithm accidentally removed it for you." And I'm
Mm.
like, and this is constantly happening with a lot of my posts. So I don't
Yeah.
really go on Instagram too much because of that. I mainly use it because of my podcast, so I can promote
Mm.
some short clips on there. But Instagram's heavy. Twitter was.
Mm.
It's gotten a little bit better now. I think there's still some shadow banning going on Twitter, I believe.
Mm.
But Instagram is crazy. Like you can't even search my name sometimes. And I think I
Yeah.
still have. I'm not sure if I still have it, but interested to see if your listeners can go on there and have a look. But when you click my name to follow, I believe it says this person has posted false information in the past. Are you really sure you want to follow them? So on top of that, I got letters from the Victorian Electoral Commission at one point
Right.
for
Mm.
posting a video that was a parody spoof of the Victorian government chime when they were leading into COVID updates, that ding, ding, ding. And someone made a spoof video of it. I got a VEC letter saying that I'm in some trouble because I didn't put a statement of declaration at the end of it. I'm like, what? I'm not a that thing that says brought to you by blah, blah, blah from camp. I'm like, I'm not a politician, number one. I'm just an average citizen, right? I like to think. And there actually was a declaration when you clicked the link, it went to a third party website. But they sent me a letter on that. And I'm just like, are you serious? This is what you're doing? So, and then the VEC wants to say they're, they're not either side. They're,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
it comes to the government and Labor and Liberal with the upcoming election, I'm like, you are. You clearly are. Like, why are you sending me this letter for? I never said
Yeah.
go and vote for anyone, go and vote for this, go and vote for that. Neither did the video. It just pointed out they're saying, oh, it's election material and well, I'm not running. So, I mean, you'd be better suited to answer as to why I got that, but that was kind of crazy.
That's one of the tactics I reckon now that's used more often. We saw it with play like APRA with doctors. They would sort of effectively suspend a doctor during COVID and almost take him out of the game, and then have the investigation afterwards when the whole thing was done. And often people would be just exonerated or moved on, or I don't know all of the details of it, but that kind of heavy bureaucratic handedness is just I don't remember it in maybe I was less involved in the political landscape 10 years ago or whatever, but it feels like we feel more surveilled than we ever have been. We feel more monitored. And I've had long-standing concerns about surveillance and the rise of digital currencies, the rise of a digital ID. You're obviously in that space, but do people out there, when you talk to them, are people aware of potentially what's coming down the line with central bank digital currencies and digital ID legislation? That's almost on us, by the way. That digital ID legislation will hit the parliament before this term is over. And there are those out there that say once that's in place with a digital currency, you can kiss your freedom goodbye. I don't know. I feel like it's one of the biggest issues going around at the moment, and all people in parliament, when I go there, are talking about is the voice. Do you get that feeling on the street? Are people aware of this stuff?
I am. I mean, people are. I don't think people realize how bad it can get when you do that. So an example would be we have another pandemic. They can turn you off. Just get
Mm.
turned off. You know, and you only have
And
so
we've
much
seen
funds to use
all of
out of
that.
your
We
own
saw
bank
it in
account.
Canada, didn't we? We saw it with the Freedom
Yeah,
Rally. I mean, that's effective. That was the little beta test. That's effectively what happened.
and that's scary. That's scary. And you know, the old I won't use the derogatory where we call ourselves Alex, but the old European adage was that the cash under the mattress. The reason why they
Yeah,
did that was because of the communist state they lived in. Often,
yeah,
you know, funds would just disappear.
yeah.
Funds will be confiscated. Funds will be taken. And I'll give you a real world example. I tweeted about this a couple of days ago. My kids were in a basketball camp a couple of days ago, and my wife and I stay and watch. We're not one of those drop off and leave just because trust issues. Kids are 6 and 4. You never know these days, right? So
Yeah.
um, my wife did the first day of it, and there's a canteen there, or a cafe, and kids have like a lunch break and a morning tea break. Um, Morning tea break comes, and my wife goes to get our kids food. All the kids go to buy food. Cafe says we don't take cash. This camp is from kids from 4 to 14. How many of them you think had a bank card or a credit card? Not many, right? So these poor kids could not buy
Mm,
food or drink at this
mm,
cafe because they would not take cash. So my wife, God bless her, like basically didn't even want their coins, just put it all on a card for all the kids there that were waiting in
mm.
line, just buying them food and chips and drinks and whatever.
Yeah,
That's a real example of
yeah,
direct. It's a direct effect. So we're going to expect now kids to have a credit card and debit card with them at 4, 5, 6 years old. Like, come on! Like,
yeah.
gone are the days of you can give your kid a gold coin and go buy some lollies and a milk bar, and that's scary as well. I think cash is super important, and we have to keep cash in play for a number of reasons. But yeah, once everything goes digital, especially with the way the banking world goes with the crisis and everything going on around the world economically, and then obviously a lot of the shenanigans that happen with cryptocurrency and all that. I mean, I think some of it was obviously horrendous, but I think the government loves that. The fact that the cryptocurrency's kind of fallen over the way it has to an extent, besides Bitcoin, they like that because, like, say, we told you, come to our central bank currency, right? Like our one's protected; it's from the government, so they've got a good play and a nice little segue to getting to what they want the people to buy into.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. And there are those real world examples. There's sort of we're getting conditioned, I suppose, to just expect to have your card. I mean, I can't remember the last time I've paid with anything in cash. Probably during COVID, to be honest, where I'm sort of sick and tired of being exposed to this sort of surveillance and whatever it was with your QR codes. I mean, it's incredible that Aussies have just adopted. It's one of the things the Americans talk about when you speak to them about. They can't believe that we were checking in everywhere and we were doing this and
Mm.
we were doing that. But this is the future. This is where it's going, and it's an interesting real
There were
world
places that wouldn't even
example.
take a physical certificate
Yeah,
during COVID,
yeah, that's right.
like a vaccination. There
That's
were
right.
places that would not allow you to bring a printed one because like, you could have forged it. You have to have it on your
Yeah,
phone.
yeah, that's right. You can see it. But I mean, talking about, I mean, this is all the stuff that you and I are probably reading out there, and as you say, it's getting real, authentic news that's not down a rabbit hole is really challenging these days. I don't know when the last time you turned the free to air on, or for me, the TV just doesn't go on anymore. I don't use it. I might as well pull the aerial out. I spent a little bit of time on social media just looking at people whose aerials were hanging out and posting them, just because I thought, well, these are people that are smart, just as a little sight gag. But it's actually true. I don't watch it anymore. The challenge is finding the right news. Where do you get yours from? Like, what do what do you look for? Do you have any sites that people would be interested in? You think are credible, that are good, that people are that you read, and anything you think that people would be interested in?
I don't have any sites. I generally follow people on social media. I think that there's a lot of writers now that run their own forums and have their own platforms that they post on. So
Yeah.
I kind of, like a Substack type model. I follow a
Yeah,
lot of people that are on
Substacks. Yeah.
Substack and write long form articles on different things.
Yeah.
I follow a lot through podcasts. I think the Joe
Yeah.
Rogan podcast is great because he has a vast
Yeah.
array of guests that have different skill sets and different thoughts on things. So I try to tune into a lot of his stuff. But yeah, your point with the mainstream media, my advice to anyone that, and this is crazy, like the older generation still, I was one of those people growing up. So my father would come home from work and he'd be home by 5:36. We'd have dinner and then we'd watch the news, which is the thing we did.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
they would react to the news. Oh, this idiot. Oh, how does that happen? Oh, bloody government ripping us off again, blah, 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 blah. Whatever was fed from the
Mm.
news was gospel. And
Mm.
God bless them, they didn't know any better at that point, right?
Mm.
That's a lot of the older generation still. That's how they're getting their news. So my advice to anyone watching mainstream news is try to get both sides of the news, and then you got to make your own decision. You get
Yeah.
the left's version, so maybe an ABC, and then more of the conservative right, maybe a Sky News. Watch both versions of it. Then you still can't take them for gospel. You got to kind of
Mm.
form your own view with it. That's my advice for mainstream, but mine's mainly social media and podcasts. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of information out there, and I think these days we live in a society with probably too much information. But the good thing about that is you can research and deep dive anything online. And I highly influence people or encourage people to jump online if they've got. If you want to learn a skill, Alex, it's amazing. You can just jump on YouTube and watch a video and learn a skill. So we are in a really good time as far as that goes, and we kind of forget about that because there's a lot of negatives of social media. But it can be used as a positive as well.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of info out there, as you say. And we don't, we want it limited as little as possible. But it is frustrating that those old sources just are so dead and buried. I think. I mean, the classic example of that for mine was in the last couple of weeks. I know you spoke to British cardiologist Dr. Assim Marotra, and I listened to that podcast, and I had a chat to him as well on this one, and he was anything goes questions, happy to take them all, answered everything. Um, Credible as you like, in my view. I mean, just a guy that had a lot of knowledge and a lot of political awareness as well, which is that intersection you need. I think it's not, a skill like cardiology is not just a skill. You've got to understand the bigger picture. And I think it's just nice to have people like him out there. I think he was an incredibly interesting person. I think he gave a talk up your way, and he gave one down here in Norwood in the town hall, packed out, absolutely packed to the rafters. Another example of people seeking different information, but no run in the media, nothing. I mean, the number of times you'd pack out the Norwood town hall here in SA, minimal, absolutely nobody. The only article that made the mainstream paper here was a few days ago when one of the guests was our deputy governor. And that became a story that he would turn up and listen to, an eminent cardiologist.
How dare you?
And that was the only mention of the whole thing in the paper. And, I thought to myself, look, this has got to be indicative, doesn't it, of just how one speed this news has become. I'm the same, by the way. I people ask me that question. That's why I asked you, because people ask me that question: where do you get your news from? Largely, it's just people you follow on social media, and then they link you to an article, and then you do it. Some Substacks, but it's a real challenge, I reckon. And if that's shut down through this new, or controlled through this new legislation, which it could be, then I think we're really going another gear in terms of censorship, and that's a real issue. But I guess just in terms of journalists, have you? I mean, do you get inquiries, and how do you deal with them when you get them from regular journalists?
Yeah, we get a little bit. But a lot of the mainstream stuff is kind of tapered down, just because I'm probably a
Mm.
no-go zone for a lot of people, probably on a few government lists. But
Yeah,
not too worried about it. I'd rather go on podcasts and have these long-form discussions. Like no
yeah,
one's ever, I've worked for some media companies before, and I've done articles for certain newspapers, and it's all just about clickbait and headlines. Nothing. There's no depth
mm,
in any of those articles,
yeah,
and it really bothers me. So I stopped working with a few of them just based on that, because I was getting clickbaited
yeah,
and taking out quotes out of context and putting my name to
yeah,
them. So I
yeah,
just I get some inquiries every now and then. I try to vet them, or the people I have working for me. We try to vet them as much as we can.
mm, yeah,
But yeah, look, I agree with you. I long for the Where is the journalist with a trench coat and the cigarette or cigar in his mouth that would just
End
dig,
behind
dig,
the ear.
dig, 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 and really get to the bottom of things? They're gone, long gone,
Mm.
and I long for them. I really do.
Yeah.
I think they, the Cluedo types, right? Like just like,
Yeah.
that's a bit strange. I'm going to dig there. I'm going to go interview. I'm going to interview both sides of this topic or of
Yeah.
this whatever's going
There's
on
a
with the
handful of them
agenda.
still out there. There's still a few here and there, but most of them are people like Matt Taibbi formerly of Rolling Stone, who had the integrity to just get up and say, oh, "This is not what I used. This is not what I signed up for." Or
But
Michael
mainstream, Alex,
Schellenberger
any in the
was
mainstream in Australia?
any of the mates. Well, I got to say there are a few. Adam Crichton, I think from the Oz, has been really good on COVID. Really, really good.
Yeah.
I really rate him. I think he's been excellent. And Frank Chung from news.com has been excellent. And there's a few that write for The Spectator, Rebecca Barnett and a couple of the Oz who've got it. But once again, they're niche markets. Like people are not getting this stuff in them. When they open their broad form, you're spot on. Most of them are clickbait. You go to any of the broad form websites now, and all for some reason they seem to be obsessed by OnlyFans. It's why? Because it's just immediately people click on it, your numbers go up. So I think people have to make that connection now that what they used to say was a style of journalism now is really just salacious entertainment more than anything, and get that news from somewhere else.
Mhm.
It's just the only way now, I think. No. But now on the subject of day-to-day stuff, what is it like? I mean, you have, back to sport for a minute, you've lived pretty much every Aussie sports kid's dream, being in the NBA. Number one draft pick, by the way, in 2005, I think, for Milwaukee. It's an amazing ride. It's an incredible journey. It must have been like pretty special. We're talking politics a little bit here, but just what was that like? Like, it's probably hard to sort of encapsulate, but that must have been a dream.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's a dream. You know, I look at it as it was a unicorn.
Mm.
My whole goal as a kid was to play professional basketball. It wasn't to play in the NBA. It was just, if anyone gives me money to play in their league, I'm there. And the NBL was probably what I thought be my ceiling as a young fella, right? Like if I can get to the NBL, play in front of friends and family, great. Give me money, give me even 100 grand a year, I'll play, right? And then as my journey kind of kept going, got older and older, went to college and all that, my star kept getting bigger. And then within a 3-year process, I kind of went from somewhat a nobody that no one had heard of, even in Australia at times, to the number one pick. It happened so quickly. And I'd be crazy to say that I thought the NBA was a realistic pathway dream for
Mm.
me. It was a unicorn, and it ended up working out. But yeah, I mean, look, my career, a lot of ups and downs, good and bad, great years, bad years, and that's what makes them. You remember those tough times, those good times. Um, Dealt with injuries at times, bounced back from them, came back and made a championship run with what two of the best shooters of all time in Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Came back and actually played in the NBL for a couple of seasons towards the end of my career when I was kind of banged up, washed up, but got 2 good years out in the NBL. So, all that kind of stuff, just they're great memories. And I have the trophies and I have all that stuff, but those don't really mean anything to me. What they mean to me is looking at them and bringing back the memory. They're a memory job. So seeing that
Mm.
stuff and then, oh, remember when that happened this season? Oh, that was a tough year because of this. So that's kind of what I reminisce with my kids when I talk to them about them. Because, kids look at it as a physical thing. Oh, wow, you've got a trophy. You try to explain to them it's not the trophy. It's not the physical being of the trophy. It's where it sets your mind to and where it takes you back to and where it takes you emotionally. And I think I've been more than blessed with everything that's worked out. People look at me and say, "Oh, you had an injury-riddled career at times, and could have been better if you weren't hurt so much," and all that kind of stuff. But I say the opposite. I played 14, 15 years professionally, dealt with injuries, fought through every one of them. Was told I was, not going to play again a couple of times with a few of my injuries. I wouldn't have the same capabilities with an arm injury I had or an ankle injury,
Mm.
and proved the doctors wrong and kept pushing forward. So I can't fault anything that I've done. I wouldn't change it for the world. And I appreciate, everyone supporting kind of my journey and getting there.
Yeah, massive ride. Must be unbelievable. And what does it look like now, day to day? Like, you sort of what are you, 38 now?
38, yeah.
Yeah. What does day to day life look like now? I mean, do you sort of, obviously business interests and podcasting and just your routine stuff. But what does a day in the life of an ex NBA star look like?
Yeah, I strategically didn't want to get involved in a 9 till 5, and don't
Mm,
need to. So I'm
mm,
in the good position of being able to manage all my own. I manage all my own finances. I invest pretty heavily in the VC startup world, both in Australia and the US. Managed to create a pretty good network over there with some really good people that I get involved with some funds that they do. I'm a minority owner of the Sydney Kings at the moment, with in the NBL. So when the NBL season's on, which is our summer, I'm usually flying back and forth to Sydney a fair bit and going to those games. That takes a lot of time. We just hired a head coach last week, so that took a lot of time interviewing candidates and whatnot. Putting our roster together right now, that takes some time. And I'm full time dad. I love being
mm.
around, being able to come home to the kids. I mean, kids are probably like struggling to figure out why I'm always home compared to other dads. But my wife and I don't work and don't need to work full time, thankfully. So I enjoy being around the kids. This is the most vital time of their life. They're 4 and 6. So the more I can be around at home, and once they start getting to those teenage years where they don't want to be around you, you got to kind of take a backward step. And I do that. And then the podcast stuff. So I'm going to ramp that up in the next for the next couple of months. Just finish building a studio close to me here, and which I'm in right now, which is bare bones, but it's getting there, and then we'll ramp up and actually have hopefully a proper forum that we can have guests on. I've got a vast network of influential guests and people, and some famous, some not, that have great stories. I'd love to get them on and just have, and I'd love if there is, well, will there be probably another pandemic or another lockdown of some sort, that when those moments come, I'd love to get conflicting views in my studio to talk. I'd love to
Yeah,
do that, and I think that's very important for society.
yeah, no, it's a good thing to do. And look, mate, just thank you for being a voice in the sort of the celebrity sports world. I think it's really really important. I say it all the time. It's one thing to get good voices in politics, but we've got to be doing that all across our community, whether it's professional bodies, school boards, well, you name it. We need those voices out there. So, you've done us ex-Yugoslav expat types very well proud, and not bad for a couple of second generation Yugoslav boys. We've done all right. So there you go, sort of
Appreciate it.
flying the
Thanks.
flag for speaking common sense.
That's it. Need more.
Yeah, no, good on you, and thanks for coming on, and really appreciate your time and all your efforts. So keep it up.
No worries. Thanks, Alex.
Cheers, mate.